My son told me he needed my signature to save his company, the tech empire he'd built from the ground up. He said I was the only person in the world he could trust. An hour after I arrived at his gleaming office in downtown Seattle, I was hiding in a cold, concrete stairwell, my heart hammering against my ribs, while my phone lit up again and again with a name I no longer recognized. Before we get into how it all fell apart, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments what's one piece of advice your parents gave you that you'll never forget. The scent of cedar hung heavy in my workshop that Tuesday morning, a clean, sharp perfume that always calmed my soul. My hands, gnarled and stained from 50 years of working with wood, moved over the half-finished arm of a rocking chair. It was a gift for the Hendersons down the road, for their first grandchild. I was sanding the curve of the maple, feeling the grain turn from rough to smooth under my fingertips, a small, honest act of creation. Out here on Vashon Island, life moved at the speed of the seasons and the ferry schedule. It was a good life, a quiet one, a life built on things that were solid, tangible, real. The phone's shrill ring was a violation, a sound from another world tearing through my peace. I wiped my hands on my canvas apron and answered. "Dad?" Leo's voice was ragged, stretched thin, with a kind of panic I hadn't heard since he was a teenager who'd crashed his first car. "Dad, thank God. I need your help. I'm in trouble." I gripped the edge of my workbench, the solid wood suddenly feeling like the only anchor in the room. "Leo, slow down. What kind of trouble?" I could hear the frantic energy of the city in the background sirens, the hum of traffic. "It's the company, Viridian. We hit a cash flow problem. A big investor pulled out, and if we can't close the gap in the next 48 hours, we're finished. Everything I've worked for will be gone." He was talking fast, the words tumbling over each other. He was a founder, a CEO, a name I'd seen in business magazines, but right then he just sounded like my son, scared. "There's a bridge loan, Dad. A formality, really. But the bank needs a majority shareholder to co-sign. It has to be family. It has to be you. You're the only one I can trust. Can you come to the office? Right now?" My late wife, Helen, had always worried about his ambition, that it would burn him up from the inside out. I saw her face in my mind for a split second, her worried eyes. But this was my son, my only child, and he was asking for my help. What father would say no? "I'm on my way," I said, my own voice sounding distant. As I hung up, the low, mournful sound of the ferry horn echoed across the water, calling me toward the city and the life my son had built, a life I was about to find out was nothing more than a gilded cage with a trap door at the bottom. I didn't even bother to clean up. The half-sanded rocking chair arm lay on my workbench like a question I didn't have time to answer. I shrugged off my canvas apron, the fine layer of maple dust puffing into the air, and grabbed the old waxed canvas jacket that had been my companion for 20 years. It smelled of sawdust, motor oil, and autumn rain, the scent of my life. As I locked the workshop door, the silence of the place felt profound, as if it knew I was stepping out of its protection and into something foreign and uncertain. My old pickup truck rumbled to life, and as I drove the winding road toward the ferry terminal, I kept replaying Leo's words. "Everything I've worked for will be gone." The phrase didn't seem real. To me, Leo's world was an abstraction, a series of headlines and photos on a screen. Viridian Dynamics. It sounded less like a company and more like a distant star. The ferry ride from Vashon to Seattle is only about 20 minutes, but that day it felt like a journey across an ocean. I left the truck and walked to the observation deck, leaning against the cold, salt-sprayed railing. The Puget Sound was a sheet of hammered gray steel under a low-hanging sky. Behind me, the familiar green hills of the island receded, their quiet, misty shores looking like a memory I was already starting to lose. Ahead, the city of Seattle clawed at the clouds, a forest of glass and concrete that seemed to grow more imposing with every churn of the ferry's engines. I'd never felt comfortable there. It was a city that hummed with a frantic energy I couldn't match, a place of relentless forward motion, while I was a man who found his purpose in the patient, steady work of his hands. I tried to remember the last time Leo had needed me for anything more than a polite holiday dinner. It must have been years. He'd always been so fiercely independent, so driven. Even as a boy, he wasn't interested in the workshop. He didn't care for the logic of wood, the way a dovetail joint fit together with perfect, honest strength. His passions were in the glowing screens of his computers, in worlds built of code and ideas I couldn't grasp. My wife, Helen, used to say he was building his own kind of cathedral. I was proud of him, of course I was. A father is always proud, but I was also bewildered. His success created a chasm between us. Our phone calls were a dance of two different languages. I'd talk about fixing a neighbor's deck, and he'd talk about scaling infrastructure and seed funding rounds. It felt like he was living on a different planet, and I was just some old relic from the home world he'd left behind. A knot of hope tightened in my chest, pushing against the apprehension. Maybe this was a good thing. Maybe this crisis would tear down the walls his success had built. For the first time in a decade, my son, the tech CEO, needed his father. Not my money, I had little of that, but my trust. My signature. My name next to his. It felt significant, like a chance to reconnect, to prove that the simple, solid values I'd tried to teach him still meant something in his fast-paced world. The hope was a fragile thing, but I clung to it. I had to believe that underneath the fancy suits and the corporate jargon was still the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the boy who'd once looked at me like I knew the answer to everything. The ferry's horn blared, a deep, resonant sound that signaled our arrival. The city loomed over me now, its massive buildings blocking out the sky. The noise was a physical assault, the roar of traffic, the shriek of sirens, the murmur of 1,000 anxious conversations. I felt like a man out of his element, a visitor from another century. I found the taxi stand, the line of yellow cars looking like cautious insects against the backdrop of corporate towers. I gave the driver the address for Viridian Dynamics, the name feeling clumsy and foreign on my tongue. As the car pulled into the chaotic river of downtown traffic, I looked up at the endless walls of shimmering glass. Somewhere up there, in one of those towers, my son was waiting, and I, his father, was coming to help, armed with nothing but a lifetime of trust he was counting on. The taxi deposited me at the foot of a giant that wore a skin of dark, reflective glass. It seemed to drink the gray daylight, leaving nothing but its own cold shadow on the street below. The name Viridian Tower was etched in stark silver letters above a revolving door that spun people in and out with relentless efficiency. For a moment, I just stood on the sidewalk, my old jacket feeling impossibly thin against the sharp metropolitan wind. I was a shipwright who had stumbled into an airport. The language, the architecture, the sheer scale of it all was from a world that had no use for me. The lobby was less a room and more a cathedral to commerce. The floors were polished black marble that reflected the cold, recessed lighting, making it feel like you were walking on a frozen lake at night. There were no comfortable chairs, only stark leather benches that looked like they were designed to punish anyone who dared to sit for too long. A young woman with a headset and a perfectly neutral expression directed me to the 30th floor. The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. As the city fell away beneath me, I didn't feel powerful. I felt disconnected, like I was being ferried up to a place where the air was too thin to breathe. The doors opened with a soft chime, not into a hallway, but directly into the heart of Viridian Dynamics. The first thing that hit me was the quiet. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of my workshop, but a tense, electric hum of people staring intently at glowing screens. The space was a maze of glass walls and sleek white desks. Dozens of young, fashionable people typed silently, their faces illuminated by the bluish light of their monitors. It felt more like a laboratory than an office, a place where ideas were being dissected under a microscope. "Dad," Leo's voice cut through the silence. He was rushing toward me from across the open-plan office, and for a second, all the strangeness melted away. He looked tired, his designer shirt was rumpled, and his usually perfect hair was slightly out of place, but his smile was blinding. He threw his arms around me in a hug that felt a little too tight, a little too performative. "You're a lifesaver, a complete lifesaver. I knew I could count on you." He held me at arm's length, his hands gripping my shoulders. His eyes were wide with what I thought was relief. He led me toward a glass-walled conference room, his hand on my back. "Dad, this is Chloe Velez, my CFO. She's the genius keeping this ship from sinking." A woman who looked to be in her late 30s stood up. She was sharp and professional in a tailored blazer, but her smile was a thin, brittle line. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her glasses, darted from Leo to me and back again. She shook my hand, and her grip was cold and surprisingly brief. "Mr. Blackwood, it's a pleasure." Her voice was steady, but there was a tension in her jaw that a man who has spent his life looking for stress fractures in wood could spot from a mile away. I chalked it up to the crisis. We were all on edge. Leo ushered us into the conference room. The far wall was a single pane of glass, with a view that stretched from the Space Needle to the mountains. It was breathtaking, but it also made me feel exposed, like we were specimens in a jar. On the enormous black table, a thick stack of documents sat waiting, a crisp white pen placed perfectly beside it. "Okay," Leo said, "all business now. Chloe has it all ready. It's mostly standard legal boilerplate, just some formalities to secure the financing and protect the family's interests while we sort this out." He fanned the papers out, revealing a daunting number of pages filled with dense, tiny print. "You just need to sign here, here, and here." He pointed to 3 yellow tabs, making it all seem so simple, so routine. I looked from the papers to my son's eager, smiling face. That quiet alarm bell in the back of my mind, the one that had started ringing when I shook Chloe's hand, was a little louder now. But then I looked into Leo's eyes, and I saw the desperate boy he was trying so hard to hide. He was my son. My duty was to help him. I pulled out the chair, the legs making no sound on the plush carpet, and picked up the heavy, expensive pen. My fingers, more accustomed to the rough grain of sandpaper and the cool weight of a chisel, felt clumsy around the sleek, cold metal of the pen. It was heavier than it looked, an expensive instrument designed for signing away fortunes, or perhaps for signing away lives. I leaned forward, my eyes skimming the first page, trying to make sense of the dense legal jargon. Words like irrevocable assignment, corporate restructuring, and personal liability swam before my eyes, a confusing sea of terms that meant little to my carpenter's mind. But Leo was right. It was mostly boilerplate, wasn't it? Just formalities. My son needed me. That was the only language I truly understood. As I hesitated, a faint tremor ran through the glass conference table. I looked up. Leo's phone, which had been buzzing almost constantly, was now ringing with an insistent, sharp tone. He glanced at the caller ID, and his confident facade flickered, just for a split second. A vein pulsed in his temple. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, barely audible. He forced a smile. "Looks like the Michigan Avenue situation just escalated. I need to take this. Emma, my assistant, will be outside the door. This won't take 5 minutes, Dad. Just look over the papers. Chloe's here if you have any questions." He squeezed my shoulder, a gesture that felt both paternal and strangely dismissive, as if shooing a child. Then he strode out of the room, his voice already lowering as he spoke into his phone to someone beyond the glass wall. The silence that descended upon the conference room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system and the distant, muffled sound of Leo's urgent voice from the hallway. Chloe Velez, who had been standing stiffly by the window, watching the city sprawl beneath us, now turned. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman wrestling with an unseen demon. She walked slowly toward the table, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of me, then on the pen still clutched in my hand. Her perfect composure seemed to be cracking around the edges. Her eyes, those intelligent, watchful eyes, met mine. There was a desperate plea in them, a raw, unvarnished fear that chilled me to the bone. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to Leo's booming confidence. "You can't sign those." My hand holding the pen froze, my brow furrowed. "What are you talking about, Chloe?" Leo said. She reached across the table, her fingers closing around my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, almost bruising, and her skin was icy cold. "What he said is a lie. Everything is a lie. He's trying to make you a fall guy." Her voice was a low, urgent hiss, her words tumbling out as if she feared being overheard even by the air itself. "This isn't a bridge loan. These documents make you the majority shareholder, retroactively, from last year." My mind reeled. Retroactively? My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief. "But I don't understand. Why would he do that?" Chloe leaned in closer, her voice dropping even further, conspiratorial and terrified. Her breath was warm against my ear. "Viridian isn't having a cash flow problem. It's a house of cards. Leo's been running a massive shell game. Wire fraud, money laundering, securities fraud. It's been going on for months. The investor who pulled out was actually cooperating with the feds. The elegant office, the stunning view, Leo's confident smile, it all dissolved into a grotesque, distorted image. It was like looking at a beautifully crafted piece of furniture and realizing it was riddled with termites, hollowed out from the inside. "He needs a scapegoat, Mr. Blackwood, someone who looks completely innocent, someone with no previous financial ties to the company, someone who would never be suspected, an outsider, an old man who loves his son and trusts him blindly. Her grip on my wrist tightened even more, digging into the flesh. "They're coming, Mr. Blackwood. The feds are already here, searching another Viridian office as we speak. You have minutes, maybe less. If you sign those papers, you will be retroactively tied to all of it, every single crime. You'll go to prison for the rest of your life." The room spun. My son, my son. He was trying to destroy me. The pen clattered from my numb fingers, bouncing once on the polished table before falling to the floor with a tiny, insignificant sound. My throat was suddenly dry, choked with a mix of horror and a cold, gut-wrenching pain that was worse than any physical blow. "Chloe, why are you telling me this?" I managed to choke out, my voice thin and reedy. She didn't hesitate. Her gaze, though filled with fear, was steady. "Because I won't stand by and watch a good man get eaten alive. Not for him. Look at page 5, the personal guarantee clause. It's written in plain English, even for an engineer. You forfeit everything." She gestured frantically toward the glass door. "He could be back any second. You need to get out of here. Now. Run." Her words were a desperate, urgent command, severing the last fragile threads of my composure. I didn't know what was real anymore, but the terror in her eyes was unmistakable. For a single, silent moment, the world ceased to exist. There was only the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears, and the sight of Chloe's terrified face. Her words hung in the air, monstrous and unbelievable. "Prison for the rest of your life. My son." The boy I had held in my arms. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and the strength from my legs. I was frozen, a statue of an old fool carved from naive trust. "Go," Chloe hissed again, her voice snapping me out of my paralysis. She shoved a heavy business card into my jacket pocket. "My personal cell. If you make it out, call me, but not from your phone. They'll track it." She didn't wait for a response. She grabbed the fallen pen from the floor, placed it back on the table, and straightened a stack of papers with a shaking hand, already constructing her alibi. Her eyes flickered toward an unmarked door near the corner of the room, one I hadn't even noticed before. "Service exit. It leads to the stairwell. Don't take the main elevators. They'll be watching. Now." Adrenaline, cold and sharp, surged through my veins. It was a primal fear I hadn't felt in 50 years. I stumbled backward, my chair scraping against the floor with a sound that felt as loud as a gunshot. I gave Chloe one last, wide-eyed look, a silent, inadequate thank you for saving my life, and then I lunged for the service door. It was heavy and unlabeled, and when I pushed it open, it revealed a world that was the complete opposite of Leo's office. There was no panoramic view, no plush carpet, no silent, focused hum. There was only the stark, brutal reality of concrete and steel. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. The air was cold and smelled of dust and damp concrete. A single, caged fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. I was at the top of a seemingly endless flight of steel stairs that spiraled down into the guts of the building. Without a second thought, I began to run. My feet, clad in worn leather work boots, clanged and echoed on the metal steps, creating a frantic, percussive rhythm of escape. 30 floors. My mind screamed the number. With every flight, the betrayal burned deeper. He smiled at me. He hugged me. He called me a lifesaver. The memories, which had been a comfort on the ferry ride over, were now instruments of torture. Each one was a lie, a carefully crafted piece of the trap he had been building for me. My lungs started to burn, a raw, searing pain that matched the one in my chest. My knees, the knees of a 6-7-year-old man who'd spent his life kneeling on hard floors, began to scream in protest. I gripped the cold, dusty steel railing, half running, half falling down the endless spiral. Floor 25. Was that a door opening above me? I froze, my breath catching in my throat, listening. Only the echo of my own frantic heartbeat answered. Floor 20. Sweat was pouring down my face, stinging my eyes. I pictured Leo walking back into that conference room, seeing the empty chair, the unsigned papers. The image of his smile curdling into a mask of pure rage propelled me downward. Floor 15. My legs were trembling uncontrollably now. I wasn't a man running. I was a controlled fall, a desperate surrender to gravity, my own son. The words looped in my head, a rhythm of agony. He would have let me die in a cage. Floor 10. The air was thicker here, heavier. I could hear the distant rumble of machinery from the building's lower levels. Floor 5. I was dizzy, seeing black spots at the edge of my vision. I didn't care. I just had to get out. I had to get away from him. Finally, I stumbled onto a landing marked P1. Parking garage. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled with the heavy steel bar on the fire door. I threw my entire weight against it, and it burst open with a groan. I staggered out into the dim, artificial twilight of the underground garage, a sprawling concrete cavern that smelled of gasoline and cold exhaust. I collapsed against a thick, round pillar, sliding down to the grimy floor, my body shaking and my lungs heaving. I was out of the tower, but I was not free. I was a fugitive, hiding in the shadows of my son's gilded cage. I stayed crouched behind that concrete pillar for what felt like an eternity, the rough surface digging into my back. My breath came in ragged, painful gasps. The only sounds were the distant hum of the garage's ventilation fans and the frantic, unsteady rhythm of my own heart. I tried to think, to force my mind to work through the fog of shock, but there was nothing there. There was only a gaping hole where my love and trust for my son used to be. My world had been reduced to the cold, grimy floor of a parking garage and the monstrous truth that was now my only companion. I was a ship without a rudder, adrift in a sea of betrayal. Then, my pocket buzzed. The vibration was a violent, jarring intrusion. I flinched as if I'd been struck. With a trembling hand, I pulled out my phone. The screen was illuminated, bright and accusatory in the dim light. The name displayed on it made my stomach clench into a tight, painful knot. Leo. I stared at it, at the 3 letters that had once defined my life, my legacy. Now, they looked like a curse. I let the call ring, the buzzing vibrating up my arm, until it finally stopped. A moment of silence, a moment of peace. It didn't last. It buzzed again. This time a text message. Leo, Dad, where are you? Are you okay? Come back up. Chloe is confused. She misunderstood everything. I read the words, and a wave of nausea washed over me. The casual, manipulative lie of it all. As if I was the one who was confused. Before I could even process it, another message arrived. Leo, seriously, Dad, this isn't funny. We're on a deadline. Pick up the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. What could I even say? Did you really plan to send your own father to die in prison? The thought was too grotesque to even form into words. The phone rang again, the screen flashing Leo over and over. I jabbed the silence button on the side, my hand shaking so badly it took 2 tries. The ringing stopped, but the screen immediately lit up with a new series of texts, one after the other, a rapid-fire assault. Leo, you're making a huge mistake listening to her. She's trying to sabotage the company. Leo, you have no idea what you're getting into. You're going to destroy this family if you don't come back right now. Leo, after everything I've done for you, for this family, this is how you repay me? Leo, pick up the damn phone, old man. That last one hit me like a slap. Old man. The term of endearment he'd sometimes used with a wry smile was now a slur, dripping with contempt. This was the real Leo. The mask was gone, and this desperate, raging creature was all that was left. I remembered Chloe's warning, not from your phone, they'll track it. I was holding a leash, a tracking beacon. He probably knew exactly where I was, cowering in this concrete tomb. I scrambled to my feet, my aching joints screaming in protest. I had to move. I looked around the garage, spotting the red, illuminated sign for a pedestrian exit. I stumbled toward it, my phone still buzzing relentlessly in my hand. I pushed the door open and emerged onto a busy Seattle sidewalk, blinking in the unexpectedly gray daylight. The street was a river of people, 1,000 strangers hurrying past, each lost in their own world, their faces buried in their own phones. For a terrifying second, it felt like they were all part of his network, 1,000 pairs of eyes watching me. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail notification. My finger slipped, and I accidentally played it. Leo's voice, now low and menacing, filled my ear. You have 5 minutes to get back to this office, or I swear to God, I will report my car as stolen with you in it. Don't test me, Dad. Terror, sharp and absolute, seized me. I jabbed the power button on my phone, holding it down until the screen went black. The sudden silence was a profound relief, but it was also the silence of being completely cut off. I stood on that crowded street corner, A 6, 7-year-old carpenter in a world I didn't understand, a ghost in a machine designed to hunt me. I was alone, untethered, with my son's threats echoing in my head, and a dead phone in my pocket that felt as heavy as a gravestone. Standing on that chaotic street corner with a dead phone in my pocket, I felt a paralysis creeping in. The city was a roaring, indifferent machine, and I was a broken cog about to be ground into dust. Every path seemed to lead to a dead end. The ferry terminal felt like a trap, my own home a compromised target. For a terrifying minute, my mind was a complete blank, a white wall of pure fear. Then, a name cut through the noise. Sam Patterson, my friend, a lawyer. It was a single solid thought in a hurricane of chaos. Tacoma. I had to get to Tacoma. I fumbled in my pockets for cash, my fingers stiff and clumsy. Hailing a cab felt like a scene from an old movie. As the car navigated the gridlocked arteries of the city, I stared out the window, but I didn't see the buildings or the people. I saw Leo's face, contorted with that final, snarling rage in his text message. Old man. The adrenaline of the escape was draining away, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread that settled deep in my bones. It was the kind of soul-deep ache that comes when a fundamental truth of your world, a father's love for his son, a son's for his father, is revealed to be a lie. Every happy memory, every proud moment, every sacrifice I'd ever made for him was now contaminated, replaying in my mind as a scene from a long con, and I was the mark. Sam's office was a world away from the glass tower. It was in a sturdy old brick building in Tacoma, with floors that creaked and windows that actually opened. The air inside smelled of old paper, leather-bound books, and strong black coffee. It was the smell of order, of history, of a world where things made sense. Sam Patterson, a man I'd known for 40 years, looked up from his cluttered oak desk, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. His easy smile vanished the second he saw my face. "Artie, my God, what happened to you? You look like you've seen a ghost." I collapsed into the worn leather chair opposite him, the story spilling out of me in a ragged, broken torrent. The frantic call, the ferry ride, the gleaming office, Chloe's whispered warning, the terrifying descent down the stairwell, the barrage of texts. It sounded insane, even to my own ears. When I finished, the only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. I took out my phone, my hand still shaking, and powered it on. Ignoring the flood of new notifications, I opened my photo gallery. I took pictures, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Just a few pages, before I ran. Sam took the phone without a word. He connected it to his computer, and the images of the documents flashed onto the large monitor on his wall. He stood in front of the screen, his back to me reading. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I watched his shoulders tense, his posture stiffening as he zoomed in on the fine print. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, he turned around. The friendly concern on his face was gone, replaced by a cold, professional fury I had never seen before. "Arthur," he said, his voice low and deadly serious, "you have no idea how close you came to dying today." He walked back to the screen, using a pen to point at the glowing text. "This isn't just a document, it's a meticulously crafted instrument of destruction. This first clause here, the shareholder restructuring agreement, it's backdated by 18 months. He wasn't just making you a cosigner, Artie. He was making you the silent majority owner for the entire period that the FBI is investigating. In the eyes of the law, every criminal decision made during that time would have originated with you." He swiped to the next photo. "And this, page 5, the personal indemnity and guarantee clause. This is the kill shot. This is the part that makes this a special kind of evil." He looked at me, his eyes grim. "This makes you, Arthur Blackwood, personally and completely liable for all of Viridian Dynamics' corporate debt. They wouldn't just seize the company's assets. They'd come for your house on the island, the one you built with Helen. They'd take your workshop, your tools, your truck. They'd drain your savings account and garnish your pension until the day you died." He wasn't just planning on sending you to prison. He was planning on erasing your entire existence. He was going to leave you with nothing but a prison cell and a name he had destroyed. I felt the blood drain from my face, my workshop, my home, Helen. It was a violation so profound, so absolute, that I couldn't breathe. Sam wasn't finished. His voice was like chipping ice. "And you need to understand the charges we're talking about. Because of the amount of money involved, Chloe mentioned 15 million. and the interstate wire transfers, this is a federal case. They'd label it a RICO conspiracy, racketeering. That's a charge they use for mob bosses, Artie. They'd paint a picture of you as the mastermind. The unassuming old carpenter, a criminal genius hiding his empire behind a quiet, simple life. It's the perfect story. And the sentence, for a crime of this magnitude, they wouldn't be asking for a few years. They'd be demanding 25 to life. No parole. He let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow. It was a death sentence. Your own son wrote you a death sentence and asked you to sign it with a smile. The room was tilting, the floor falling away beneath me. This wasn't just a desperate act of self-preservation. This was a cold, calculated execution. My son, my Leo, had looked me in the eye and tried to murder my soul. Sam walked over and put a firm, steadying hand on my shoulder. His voice was quiet now, but it vibrated with a righteous anger that seemed to shake the very room. He didn't just try to frame you, Artie, he said, his gaze locked on mine. He tried to murder you, just with paper instead of a weapon. And I swear to you, on my friendship with you and on the memory of Helen, we are going to burn him to the ground for it. The drive back to the ferry terminal was a blur. Sam had packed me a thermos of coffee and made me promise to call him from a neighbor's phone the second I got home. He wanted me to go to a hotel, to lay low, but I refused. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't going to hide. The workshop, the house, the land that was my life. I wouldn't let him chase me out of it. Not yet. The ferry ride back to Vashon was a mirror image of the morning's journey. The hope that had carried me toward the city was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty that felt like a block of granite in my stomach. The Seattle skyline receded behind me, no longer a symbol of my son's success, but a monument to his depravity. The mist rolling over the water felt like a shroud, and I was a man returning to a graveyard. My old truck rattled up the long gravel driveway, the familiar crunch of the tires under the wheels doing nothing to soothe my frayed nerves. I saw it before I even cleared the first line of fir trees. A sleek black Tesla, parked near the front porch. It looked like a panther that had wandered out of the jungle and into a petting zoo, arrogant, predatory, and utterly out of place. He was here. He had been waiting, the ambush. A part of me had known this was coming, that he wouldn't just let me disappear. I put the truck in park, the engine rumbling for a moment before I cut the ignition. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. The truck door slammed shut with a solid metallic thud that echoed in the evening air. It was a sound of finality. Leo emerged from his car, not with the anger I'd heard on the phone, but with a carefully reconstructed mask of pained concern. He'd had time to rehearse. He started walking toward me, his hands held out in a gesture of peace. "Dad, thank God," he began, his voice dripping with false relief. "I've been out of my mind with worry. You vanished. I thought you'd had a fall, or something terrible happened. I've been calling the hospitals." I didn't move. I just stood there by the door of my truck, letting him walk into the wall of my silence. Sam's words were a shield around me. 25 to life. He tried to murder you with paper. When he was a few feet away, I finally spoke. My voice was low, gravelly, and held a coldness that was unfamiliar even to me. "Worry, Leo? Or were you worried your plan had failed?" The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The feigned concern evaporated, and his face hardened into a mask of pure frustration. "Okay, what did that washed-up CFO tell you?" "She's a disgruntled employee, Dad. She's trying to get a bigger severance. You can't listen to her." "I listened to my lawyer," I said, the words like stones. "I listened to a friend who took 30 minutes to show me how you plan to throw the rest of my life into a fire to save yourself." "You don't understand business," he suddenly roared, his voice cracking. He took a step closer, his finger jabbing the air between us. "This is how the game is played. I built an empire from nothing. Nothing. All I needed was some temporary cover, a signature. It was a formality that wouldn't have even affected you for years." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it sent a surge of white-hot rage through me. Affected me? I took a step forward, and for the first time, he flinched. 25 to life, Leo. That's the formality you're talking about. My house, my workshop, the place I built with your mother. You were going to let them take it all, weren't you? You were going to let them strip me of her memory, of every good thing I ever built, and leave me to rot in a cell. You were going to erase me from the world. He stared at me, his chest heaving. The truth, laid bare, seemed to have robbed him of his arguments, leaving only raw, narcissistic fury. "My God, you're so damn dramatic," he screamed, the sound echoing off the trees. "Yes, okay, yes. I needed a fall guy. Is that what you want to hear?" He threw his hands up in the air. "You lived your small, pathetic life in this museum of failure. You were content to build birdhouses while I built something that mattered. I was on the cover of magazines, and it was all about to crash and burn because of a few bookkeeping errors." He took another step, his face contorted into an ugly sneer. "You're 67 years old. Your life is over anyway. You could have done this one useful thing for me. For once, your life could have had some actual meaning." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, and all the rage inside me instantly vanished, replaced by a grief so profound it felt like the bottom of a frozen lake. In that moment, looking at the twisted, hateful face of the man before me, I finally understood. The son I had raised, the boy I had loved, was gone. He had died somewhere along the road to building his empire, and this stranger, was all that was left. His own rage, having found no purchase in me, turned inward. With a guttural roar, he spun around and slammed his fist into the hood of my old pickup truck. The metal dented with a sickening crunch. He cradled his hand, his face a mask of pain and impotence. I looked at him, at the dent in the faithful old truck that had served me for decades, at the pathetic, raging man-child before me, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty sadness. "The boy I raised is dead," I said, my voice quiet, hollow. "I don't know who you are, but you are not my son." He stared at me, his eyes wide, as if I had just struck him. The finality in my voice was something he couldn't argue with, couldn't manipulate, couldn't bully. He had lost. He slowly backed away toward his car, his face pale. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice trembling. "When the feds and the lawyers are done with you, you'll be begging me for help. You're nothing without my name." He scrambled into his Tesla. The electric engine whirred silently, but he stomped on the accelerator. The tires spun on the gravel, spitting stones against the side of my workshop as he tore down the driveway and disappeared. I was left standing in a cloud of dust, the silence of the island descending once more. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a battlefield after the fighting is over. The silence of a home that had just been irrevocably broken. The cloud of dust settled, and the only sound was the rustle of the wind in the tall firs that lined my property. I stood there in the driveway for a long time, just breathing. The air was clean and sharp with the smell of pine and the coming evening, a stark contrast to the foulness that had just transpired. I walked over to my old truck and ran my fingers over the fresh wound in the hood, a deep, ugly dent in the faded blue metal. It was a scar, a permanent reminder of the violence of my son's betrayal. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief, which had been a cold, bottomless ocean, began to crystallize. It hardened into something solid, something heavy, something I could hold. It hardened into resolve. I didn't go inside my own house. Instead, I walked down the gravel drive to the Hendersons' place, just as I had promised Sam. Martha Henderson saw me from her kitchen window and met me on the porch, her face etched with concern. She didn't ask any questions, just handed me her cordless phone. I dialed Sam's number from memory. "Artie?" His voice was tight with worry. "He was here," I said, my voice steady, level. "It's over. The conversation is over." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you okay?" "No," I answered honestly. "But I'm ready. What's next?" The next morning, I was back in Tacoma. Sam's office no longer felt like a cozy sanctuary. It had become a command center. He had a large whiteboard set up, and on it, he had already started a timeline. "We're not waiting for them to make a move, Artie," he said, handing me a cup of coffee that was strong enough to dissolve steel. "We are not the defense. We are the prosecution. We go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we hand them their case against Leo Blackwood on a silver platter. We give them the narrative, the evidence, and the key witness who will burn him to the ground." "Chloe," I said. "Chloe," he confirmed. "Her testimony, corroborating your story from inside the company, is everything. Without her, it's a messy," he said, family drama. "With her, it's a slam dunk. We need to know if she'll talk." He slid a small, featureless black phone across the desk. "A burner, untraceable. Call her, see where she stands." I took the phone and the business card she had pressed into my pocket. It felt like a lifetime ago. I walked over to the window, my back to Sam, and dialed the number. It rang 3 times, and I was sure she wouldn't answer. Then, a quiet, hesitant, "Hello? Chloe, it's Arthur Blackwood." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Mr. Blackwood, are you all right? I saw Leo leave the office yesterday like a storm cloud." He was enraged. "I'm all right," I lied. "Chloe, my lawyer and I are going to the authorities. We have to. But he said it would be my word against my son's. He said your testimony would be crucial," she finished for me, her voice trembling slightly. "I know. Leo's already had my corporate accounts locked. I've been placed on administrative leave. He's trying to isolate me, to intimidate me." There was a long pause, and I could hear the terrible weight of the decision she was making. "He thinks he can buy my silence. But what he did to you, what he was willing to do. I have children, Mr. Blackwood. I have to be able to look them in the eye." Her voice firmed up, the fear replaced by the same steely resolve I was beginning to feel myself. "Yes, I'll testify. And I have more than just my testimony. I have emails, encrypted server logs. I have everything. Tell your lawyer he's about to have a very good day." When I hung up, I felt the first glimmer of something that wasn't just grief or rage. It was strength. We had a weapon. That night, back on the island, I didn't go to my workshop. The thought of creating anything felt impossible. Instead, I sat at the old oak table in my kitchen, the one I'd built for Helen when we were first married. I had a fresh legal pad, a sharp pencil, and a pot of coffee. Sam had told me, "Your memory is our sharpest tool, Artie. We need to forge it into something they can't break." So I began to build, not with wood, but with truth. I started 2 years ago and worked my way forward. Every phone call I could remember, every visit, every time Leo had mentioned a cash crunch or made a joke about creative accounting. I remembered a dinner last year where he'd bragged about moving assets to an offshore company to maximize efficiency. At the time, it had sounded like a foreign language. Now it sounded like a confession. The process was agony. It forced me to relive every lie, every moment of false affection, every gesture that I now saw was part of his long and patient betrayal. But with every word I wrote, I felt myself growing stronger. I was taking the story back. He had used my love and my life as his weapons, and now I was taking my memories and my truth and forging them into a sword. I worked late into the night, the only light coming from the lamp over the table, my hand moving steadily across the page. The joy of creation was gone, replaced by the grim, methodical necessity of deconstruction. I was no longer just a father or a carpenter. I was a witness, and I would be ready. The days that followed felt like the eerie calm before a storm. I stayed close to home, the legal pad full of my handwritten notes sitting on the kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. Sam called every day, his voice a calm, reassuring presence in the quiet chaos of my life. He was meeting with the U.S. Attorney's office, feeding them the detailed timeline I had constructed and corroborating it with the mountain of digital evidence Chloe had bravely provided. We had lit the fuse. Now, all we could do was wait for the explosion. It came on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the confrontation in my driveway. I was in the kitchen, washing the morning's coffee pot, when my neighbor's phone, which I was keeping for Sam's calls, rang. "Artie," Sam's voice was clipped, urgent. "Turn on the news. Any Seattle channel." I dried my hands, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I walked into the living room and switched on the small television I rarely used. The screen flickered to life, not with a morning talk show, but with a live breaking news report. The image was a shaky aerial shot from a helicopter, looking down on a familiar glass tower that pierced the gray Seattle sky. The Viridian Tower. My breath caught in my throat. The reporter's voice was a frantic staccato. "We are live over downtown Seattle, where federal agents from the FBI are currently executing a search warrant on the corporate headquarters of Viridian Dynamics. As you can see, multiple agents are entering the building, while others are securing the lobby. Employees are being asked to leave, and we're told all company assets have been frozen, pending an ongoing investigation into what sources are calling massive financial irregularities." The camera zoomed in, and I could see them, men and women in dark blue jackets with the bold yellow letters FBI on the back. They were streaming into the very building where I had almost signed my life away. The gilded cage was being broken open, its secrets dragged out into the harsh light of day. I watched, feeling a strange and profound detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life, about a building on a planet I had only visited once. The story was the lead on the national news that evening. The next morning it was the front page of the business section. But the truly devastating blow came that afternoon. Another call from Sam. Another instruction to turn on the TV. This time, the footage wasn't from a helicopter. It was raw, shaky footage from a news photographer on the ground, outside a luxury condominium building I didn't recognize. The revolving doors opened, and there he was, Leo. He was flanked by two stern-faced agents. He was still wearing one of his expensive suits, but it was rumpled, and his face was a pale, slack mask of disbelief. His eyes, which had burned with such rage in my driveway, were now hollow and vacant. He tried to hold his head high, to project that familiar arrogance as they guided him toward an unmarked black car, but it was a pathetic imitation. I watched as one of the agents gently pushed his head down to keep him from hitting it on the doorframe before he slid inside. It was an act of professional courtesy, but it felt like the most humiliating gesture in the world. The door closed, and the car pulled away into traffic, disappearing. My son. He was gone. I instinctively reached out and put my hand on the cool glass of the television screen, my fingers tracing the outline of his face for a split second before the image changed. The anchor came back on screen. Leo Blackwood, the 39-year-old founder and CEO of Viridian Dynamics, was arrested today on a 7-count federal indictment including wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. He is being held without bail. I sank back into my armchair, the strength leaving my limbs. There was no joy, no triumph. There was only a vast, cavernous ache in my chest. Justice felt less like a victory and more like a tragedy I had been forced to set in motion. The empire, the one he had bragged about, the one he had sacrificed his soul to build, had crumbled to dust in a matter of hours. The headlines were brutal. Tech Wonder Boy's spectacular fall. Viridian Dynamics, a house of lies. Founder accused of defrauding investors of millions. Later that day, Jim Henderson came over from next door. He didn't say much. He just handed me a plate of his wife's lasagna, covered in foil. "We saw the news, Artie," he said, his hand resting on my shoulder for a moment. "Just wanted to make sure you were eating." I nodded, unable to speak. The simple, honest kindness of a neighbor felt more real than any multi-million-dollar company. After he left, I turned off the television. The screen went black, reflecting my own tired, haunted face. The public spectacle was over. The empire was in ruins. All that was left was the final, quiet, and most terrible reckoning of all, facing my own son across a courtroom. The months leading up to the trial were a slow grind of legal preparations. Depositions, strategy meetings, and endless phone calls with Sam became my new reality. The world of wood shavings and joinery felt like a distant dream. Finally, the day arrived. It was a crisp, clear morning in late spring. The U.S. District Courthouse in downtown Seattle stood imposing and permanent against the blue sky, its stone columns looking like the very pillars of justice. I stood on the steps for a moment, Sam by my side, and felt the immense gravity of the building. This was a place for endings. It was a place where truth, once spoken, would be carved into an official record, unchangeable and absolute. Inside, the courtroom was all dark wood and hushed reverence. The air was thick with a formal, quiet tension. We took our seats in the front row, behind the prosecution's table. And then I saw him. Leo was already sitting at the defendant's table, flanked by two expensive-looking lawyers. The sight of him was a physical jolt. The arrogant, powerful CEO was gone. The raging, contemptuous stranger from my driveway was gone. The man in his place looked diminished. He was thin, his skin had a pale, sallow quality, and the suit he wore, though well-tailored, hung on his frame as if it belonged to a bigger man. He was a ghost haunting the memory of his own success. Throughout the entire proceeding, he stared straight ahead at the judge's bench, his jaw tight. He never once looked at me. The trial unfolded over several days, a methodical presentation of the facts we had helped assemble. Financial experts traced the web of shell companies. FBI agents detailed the digital evidence. But the case truly turned on two voices. Chloe Velez was the first. She walked to the witness stand with a quiet confidence that I admired deeply. Her voice was clear and steady as she answered the prosecutor's questions, methodically laying out the architecture of Leo's fraud. She explained the backdated financial models, the frantic efforts to find a clean entity to absorb the liabilities, and the creation of the very documents that had been placed in front of me. The The defense attorney, a sharp man with a silver tongue, tried to paint her as a vengeful, disgruntled employee seeking to save herself. "Isn't it true, Miss Velez," the lawyer asked, his voice dripping with insinuation, "that you were simply disgruntled with Mr. Blackwood's management style?" Chloe looked from the lawyer to the jury, her gaze unwavering. "I was disgruntled, yes," she said calmly. "I was disgruntled by the fact that my boss was planning to sacrifice his own elderly father to cover up his crimes. I found that to be a very poor management style." A quiet murmur went through the courtroom. The lawyer had no further questions. Then it was my turn. My heart hammered as I walked to the stand and swore the oath. The room was silent. The prosecutor's voice was gentle as he guided me through my story. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't need to. The events were burned into my memory. I told them about the frantic call, the hope I'd felt on the ferry, the cold dread in Chloe's eyes, the desperate run down 30 flights of concrete stairs. I spoke of the dent in my truck and the monstrous words that had been hurled at me in my own driveway. I told my story simply, not with anger, but with a sadness that felt as heavy as the oak of the witness box. The prosecutor's final question was the hardest. "Mr. Blackwood," he asked, his voice soft, "when you were in that conference room, and you finally understood what your son was asking you to do, what he had planned for you, how did you feel?" I paused, the entire courtroom seeming to hold its breath. I allowed myself to look at the defendant's table, at my son. He was staring down at his hands, his shoulders hunched. I began, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I felt like my whole life had been a lie. The man who was trying to destroy me wasn't just a criminal. He was the little boy I taught how to build things, how to make a birdhouse, how to plane a piece of wood until it was true and smooth. And I realized he had used that skill to build a trap for me. In that moment, I didn't feel rage. I just felt a silence. The silence of a son I no longer knew. The verdict came 2 days later. We all stood as the jury filed back in, their faces grim and unreadable. Leo was on his feet, his lawyers on either side of him. He looked like a man already in his coffin. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, handed a paper to the clerk. "On the first count of the indictment, conspiracy to commit wire fraud," the foreman read, her voice clear and steady in the silent room, "we, the jury, find the defendant, Leo Blackwood, guilty." A quiet gasp went through the gallery. She continued, her voice a drumbeat of finality. "On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty." On and on it went, for all 7 counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Leo didn't cry out. He didn't collapse. He simply deflated. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed, and he sank back into his chair as if the strings holding him upright had been snipped. It was the quiet, absolute finality of utter defeat. Sam put a firm hand on my shoulder. I watched my son, my broken, disgraced son, and felt no victory. The truth had been spoken. Justice had been served. But all I felt was the hollow, aching weight of what it had cost. I had won my life back, but I had lost my son forever. The sentencing was 2 months later. It was a formality, a final, grim piece of punctuation at the end of a terrible chapter. I sat in the same seat in the courtroom, with Sam beside me. Leo was brought in wearing a drab, featureless prison jumpsuit, the expensive suit, and the arrogant posture now a distant memory. He was just a number in a system. The judge was a stern woman with eyes that seemed to see right through to a person's soul. She spoke of the sanctity of trust, particularly the trust between a parent and a child. She called Leo's actions an act of profound moral depravity before sentencing him to 18 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. I watched as he was led away by the marshals, his shoulders slumped. He never looked back. That was the last time I ever saw my son. I returned to Vashon Island, but the peace I had always found there was gone. The legal battle was over, but the war had left my home occupied by ghosts. Every room, every corner, was a battlefield of memory. I'd walk into the living room and see the fireplace where a younger, happier Leo had opened Christmas presents. I'd stand in the kitchen and remember the scuff marks on the doorframe where I had marked his height year after year. The memories that had once been a source of warmth and comfort were now sharp, painful shards of a life that was a lie. The house itself felt like it was holding its breath, suffocating under the weight of what had happened. My workshop, my sanctuary, offered no escape. It felt alien to me now. I'd stand in the doorway, the familiar scent of cedar and sawdust doing nothing to soothe the ache in my chest. The half-finished rocking chair for the Hendersons' grandchild still sat on my workbench, a monument to the moment my world had been shattered. I would run my hand over the smooth, unfinished wood and feel nothing. The joy, the purpose, the simple, honest satisfaction I had always found in my craft had vanished. The tools felt heavy and useless in my hands. How can you build something new when the very foundation of your life has been turned to rubble? It was a few weeks after the sentencing, on a gray, drizzly morning, that I knew what I had to do. I was looking out the kitchen window at the rain-slicked fir trees, holding a coffee cup that had gone cold in my hands. I realized I couldn't heal here. This house wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of my own grief. To stay here would be to let Leo's betrayal have the final word, to let his ghost haunt me for the rest of my days. Leaving the place I had built with Helen, the place where we had raised our son and planned our future, was the most painful decision of my life. But staying would be a slow death. The process of packing was a quiet, somber ritual of letting go. I went through 40 years of accumulated life, sorting memories into boxes. The photos of Leo as a smiling, innocent boy were the hardest. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, but I couldn't bear to look at them either. I wrapped them in an old cloth and placed them at the bottom of a box, a chapter of my life to be stored but no longer read. I carefully cleaned and oiled my tools, wrapping each one like a precious jewel, the instruments of a life I was leaving behind. On the final day, I stood in the empty living room. The furniture was gone, the walls were bare, and my footsteps echoed in the hollow space. Through the window, I could see the sold sign hammered into the front lawn. I was surrounded by the ashes of my former life. But as I took one last look at the home that was no longer mine, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't pain. It was a single, tiny ember of hope. By letting it all go, I was finally giving myself permission to build something new. It's been a year since the sentencing. I didn't go back to the Puget Sound. I drove south until the landscape felt different, until the memories couldn't follow me anymore. I found a small cabin tucked away in the woods of Central Oregon, with a river that whispers secrets to the stones and pine trees so tall they seem to hold up the sky. It's a quiet place, a good place. My new life is smaller than my old one, and infinitely more peaceful. The mornings are my favorite. I sit on the porch I built myself, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and watch the light filter through the trees. I'm not alone here. A few months after I arrived, I visited the local animal shelter and found an old, gray-muzzled retriever mix with sad eyes and a gentle soul. His name is Chip. The kennel card said he was abandoned. We understood each other immediately. We were two survivors who needed a second chance at a quiet life. He now spends his days sleeping in sunbeams at my feet, his presence a steady, comforting weight. He is a better companion than I have had in years. I built a new workshop, smaller than the old one, but it's all mine. The scent of cedar and pine is once again my closest friend. I don't take on big projects anymore. There are no commissions, no deadlines. I build what my heart tells me to. Last week it was a set of intricately carved wooden animals for the children's wing at the local library. Today, I'm fixing a wobbly leg on a chair for my neighbor down the road, a retired schoolteacher named Mary. The joy in my craft has returned, not as the grand purpose it once was, but as a quiet, daily practice. It is the simple, honest act of making something whole again. Last week, a letter arrived, forwarded from Sam's office. It was from Chloe Velez. She wrote that she and her family had moved to Colorado. She has a new job as a CFO for a renewable energy startup, a company she said is run by people who actually want to build something real. She thanked me again for my courage and told me that her children know my story. Not the details, but the lesson, that you must always, always do the right thing, no matter the cost. Her letter felt like closing a circle, a reminder that good, honest people still exist. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I think of Leo. I don't feel anger anymore, or even the sharp agony of grief. I just feel a distant, profound pity for the boy who got so lost chasing shadows that he traded his soul for an empire of dust. He was wrong. My life wasn't small or without meaning. It was built on the love of a good woman, the satisfaction of honest work, and the quiet dignity of a well-lived day. I know that now more than ever. Betrayal is a fire that burns your life to the ground. It leaves you standing in the ashes, thinking that nothing will ever grow again. But it's not true. If you're patient, and if you're brave enough to clear the rubble and start over, you find that the ground is more fertile than you ever imagined. I lost a son, but I found a strength I never knew I possessed. I am no longer haunted by the past. I am building, I am healing, I am home.